them in a battle no one else can see. And perhaps that is exactly what is happening. Friend for Life does not always fight us with swords and armies. Sometimes it fights us with silence, with uncertainty, with the slow, heavy ache of responsibility. And right in the middle of that hidden war, I want to remind you of a picture so old yet so alive. Moses standing on a hilltop, his hands lifted not in victory, but in surrender below him. Joshua fought with Amalek, but the real turning point was not the strength of the soldiers, it was the posture of a leader who knew his own limits. What fascinates me is not that Moses won, but that he grew tired. You see, strength in the kingdom of God is not measured by how long you can keep your hands raised on your own, but by when you admit that you cannot and still choose to keep them lifted. Life today offers us 1,000 ways to appear strong, to power, through to pretend everything is manageable, but down in your soul, you may feel those arms starting to tremble. I have seen far too many brave souls collapse, not because the battle was tougher, but because they believed they must remain unbreakable. Moses sat down on a stone not out of defeat but faith. It was an act of humility wrapped in holy exhaustion, and that was when help arrived. Arms appeared on either side, Aaron and Hur lifting what was falling, holding up what could no longer stand alone. And that is where many of us are called to begin, not by doing more, but by accepting that morning prayer is less about performance and more about posture. It is not a ceremony for the strong, it is a refuge for the weary. Lift your hands again. Yes, but know this, if they begin to shake, you are not failing. You are simply in the same story Moses was, and God has already prepared someone somewhere to steady you. So this morning, before you run back into the fight, let your first act be surrender, not giving up, but giving in to the only one who has ever truly carried victories in his hands. And maybe this is why you woke up tired. Because the war was already raging while you slept, yet the truth is the battle has never depended solely on you. It is God who fights for you, and your role is simply to remain in his presence. The enemy will whisper that weakness is failure, but in God's economy, weakness is the very doorway through which his strength pours in the world, teaches you to toughen up, to hide your cracks, to fake a smile. But the gospel tells you, blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. So bring your weariness as an offering, bring your trembling as an act of trust, bring your sighs as silent prayers, and let him turn them into strength that is not your own. Sometimes the most spiritual thing you can do is sit on the stone like Moses did and let others help you. Let community be God's hands to lift yours when they fall. Let grace hold you steady when resolve has slipped. Let prayer be the rope that ties your fragile heart to his unshakable promises. There is no shame in being carried for. The shepherd carries his sheep on his shoulders. There is no shame in leaning on others, for even Jesus allowed Simon of Cyrene to bear his cross. There is no shame in slowing down, for Elijah found God, not in the wind or the fire, but in the gentle whisper. The battle is real, yes, but so is the provision, so is the help, so is the God who has never lost one fight, and he will not start with you. The day will try to rush you, the tasks will demand you, the noise will drown you, but if you begin with surrender, if you begin by lifting what little you can lift, you will find heaven bending low to meet you. I wonder if you realize that prayer in the morning is not about changing God's heart, but about shaping yours, not about informing him of your burdens, but about remembering that you are not meant to carry them alone when you bow low. You are lifted high when you let go. You are held When you confess weakness, you become strong because his power is made perfect in weakness. So do not despise the trembling arms. Do not curse the weary soul. Do not think you are less spiritual because you cannot stand without help. You are exactly where grace works best. You are exactly the kind of vessel God delights to fill. This is the hidden secret of victory. It has never been about perfect strength, but about perfect surrender. So today, when you rise, when you step into whatever battles await, you do not go in pretending, do not go in performing, go in surrender, go in aware that the same God who parted seas still holds back waters for you the same. Christ who prayed in Gethsemane with sweat like blood still intercedes for you the same. Spirit who raised Jesus from the dead still dwells within you. Lift your hands, even if they shake open your mouth, even if the words are weak. Take the step, even if it feels small, for heaven sees and heaven answers and heaven moves when earth depends on God more than self. So let this morning be the reminder you need. You are not alone in the hidden war. You are not forgotten in the silent nights. You are not abandoned in the long days. You are held, lifted, carried, fought for, and loved beyond measure. Therefore, begin again, surrender again, and trust again. For in doing so, you stand not in your own strength, but in His, and that is a ground the enemy cannot touch. If Moses had chosen to go down into the valley and fight beside Joshua, no one would have blamed him, yet he understood something we often forget. You can win a battle with strategy and still lose your soul if you forget who truly holds the victory. There is a quiet courage in stepping away from the noise, in climbing the hill of surrender, and choosing worship over control. So let me ask you a question, not as a preacher to a crowd, but as a fellow traveler in need of mercy when life presses hard against you. Do you rush to fix everything, or do you dare to stop and lift your hands first in worship? What posture will you choose today? Because the breakthrough we often seek down in the valley begins with a decision we make in private. The moment we say, Lord, I cannot, but you can. Perhaps this morning you feel that weight of needing to be strong, calculating every outcome, protecting every corner of your life. Yet somewhere deep inside there is a whisper telling you the real strength is found not in clenching your fists, but in opening your hands. If that is you, I invite you to respond, not for me alone, but for your own heart. Would you dare to comment, I am ready, or simply type the number 1 like Moses raising his staff as a declaration that you are choosing a new way forward, that you are tired of pretending and ready to begin surrendering? It may seem like a small thing to write a few words beneath a video, but sometimes the smallest gesture becomes the loudest cry of faith. I read every response, and I want you to know that those simple words tell me you are there and that I am not speaking into the empty air. It tells me you are hungry for change, starting now here in this sacred moment, and that means more than you could ever imagine. So if today is the day you dare to climb the hill with your heart uncovered, say, I am ready, or type 1, and let it be your signal both to heaven and to me that you are stepping into the kind of battle where worship is your weapon and surrender is your strength. Because when you take that step, you are not merely typing words, you are aligning your heart with the God who moves mountains and splits seas and commands angels to war on your behalf. And I promise you, this surrender does not weaken you. It equips you for battles you could never win in your own power. Think of how often we exhaust ourselves trying to control every detail, arranging every outcome, forcing solutions. Yet when the night falls and our energy drains, we find ourselves no closer to peace. Moses understood the greater fight was not with Amalek's army, but with the temptation to trust his own strength. And the same is true for us. The fiercest war is often invisible, fought within our hearts, where fear wrestles with faith, where pride resists humility, where the illusion of control refuses to bow to the sovereignty of God. But every time you choose worship over worry, every time you choose surrender over striving, you are declaring the victory belongs to the Lord and not to your own hands. And that kind of decision changes everything. You may not see it immediately. You may still feel the pressure of circumstances, but deep inside your soul, a shift begins. Heaven takes note, and the ground under your feet becomes holy, because you dared to trust when you could have clung. You dared to bow when you could have fought. You dared to believe when you could have doubted. And that is the kind of faith that pleases God, the faith that lifts trembling hands, whispers, "Lord, I am ready." The valley will always be there. The demands of life will always call. But there is a higher place, a hilltop, where surrender gives you sight, where worship opens the heavens, and where the strength of God becomes your portion. So do not despise the small beginnings. Do not dismiss the little act of writing one word or one number. Let it be your altar. Let it be your marker that today you chose differently, that today you chose Him over yourself. I will see your words, and they will remind me too that none of us are alone in this journey. We are climbing together, lifting one another's hands as Aaron and Hur did for Moses. And as we do that, the banner over us is love. The name over us is Jesus, and the victory ahead of us is certain. So, friend, lift your eyes, lift your hands, lift even your weary heart, and say with courage, "I am ready," not because you feel strong, but because He is strong, not because you know the way, but because He is the way, not because you have it all together, but because He holds all things together in His hands. And in that confession, you will find the freedom you have been searching for. In that surrender, you will find the strength you thought you had lost. In that simple act of faith, you will discover that heaven is nearer than you ever imagined, and the God who fought for Israel still fights for you today. There are moments when surrender is not a sweet song, but a sharp edge cutting through our pride, and perhaps that is why so many resist it, choosing instead to stay in the valley where noise and movement can disguise a heart that is slowly drifting from the presence of God. Yet Moses understood a fearful truth. The greatest danger was not Amalek swinging the sword below, but the slow lowering of his own arms above. Every inch those hands dropped represented a measure of worship, lost ground for the enemy to claim. I wonder if you have ever felt your spirit slipping, not all at once, but through unnoticed degrees: a prayer delayed, a worship song silenced, a Bible left closed, until suddenly you realize the battle has turned and you do not know when it happened. Imagine that terrifying awareness Moses felt as he saw the enemy advance each time his arms weakened. It was not a lesson in stamina, but in vigilance, because worship is not a mood, it is a war posture, and like any battle, it must be maintained with ruthless intention. One might ask why God chose to tie Israel's victory to the lifting of weary hands, perhaps so that every generation after would remember that heaven moves not when we are impressive, but when we are obedient. And maybe that is where you are meant to tremble a little today. For if worship can invite God power, then neglect can invite defeat. If lifting your heart shifts destiny, then lowering it leaves room for darkness. If that thought unsettles you, good, let it awaken toward you from the comfort that keeps your hands at your side instead of raised toward the throne. For in this story there are only two choices, lift or fall. Moses did not win because he was stronger, but because he refused to stop lifting even when everything inside him wanted to collapse. The moment he sat on that stone and allowed others to hold his arms, the tide turned once more. Victory came through surrender that did not look glorious yet. It was glory itself. And perhaps this is where your life intersects with the ancient story, because battles today rarely come with swords and shields. But they do come with exhaustion, anxiety, temptation, and fear. And like Amalek, they strike when you are most weary. You may not feel the clash of armies, but you know the weight of silent despair, the pull of distractions, the ache of prayers unanswered. And in those moments, your arms fall almost without noticing, and ground is lost, not because God failed, but because vigilance slipped. Worship drifted, and the heart grew dull. Yet here lies the mercy of the Lord. He does not ask you to stand forever in your own strength. He provides the stone on which you can rest. He sends the Aaron and Hur who can lift your arms when your strength fails. He surrounds you with reminders that your victory is not your achievement, but His gift sustained through surrender. So if you feel yourself faltering, do not mistake that weakness as final. It is the very place where grace rushes in. Moses shows us that dependence is not defeated, is the posture that secures triumph, because when the arms were lifted, heaven moved. When they were lowered, darkness advanced. And this same truth holds for you when you choose worship over worry, prayer over panic, surrender over striving. You invite the power of God into the valley below where the real battles rage. So do not despise the discipline of lifting your heart daily, even when you feel nothing for feelings. Do not win wars. Faith does, and faith is proven not in moments of ease, but in persistence. When everything within you wants to give up, remember also that surrender is not passive. It is the most active stance you can take. For to lift your heart to heaven is to declare war on despair and to align your weakness with His strength. This is why the sharp edge of surrender feels so costly. It cuts through self-reliance. It strips away illusion, and it exposes the truth that without Him we are nothing, but with Him we cannot lose. And maybe this is what Spirit is whispering to you now, that the victory you long for will not come from holding tighter, but from letting go, from raising what feels too heavy, from choosing again and again to lift your eyes above the valley. So let me urge you, as one fellow traveler do, not wait until your arms have fallen so low that you awaken to a battlefield. Lost. Start now, lift now, surrender now, even if your voice shakes, even if your strength trembles, because every inch you lift is ground reclaimed. Every prayer whispered is a banner raised. Every moment of worship is a declaration that the throne of heaven rules over the valley of earth. The story of Moses is not simply history. It is a mirror showing us that glory comes not in looking impressive, but in being obedient. And so today, the choice is before you: lift or fall, surrender or strive, raise your heart or let it sink. And I pray you choose to lift, even if you must lean on others, even if you must cry while doing it, even if it costs your pride, because in that posture, you will find not only victory, but the presence of God Himself, who delights to move when His children surrender. There comes a point in every battle when even the bravest heart whispers a dangerous question: have I been forgotten? Moses surely felt it as he sat on that stone, watching the enemy push forward. Each time his arms sank, though his spirit was willing, his flesh trembled with fatigue. I have often wondered why God allowed those hands to grow weary in the first place. Why not strengthen them instantly? Instead, God left Moses in that uncomfortable space where surrender must deepen until pride breaks. This is where many believers falter, not from lack of faith, but from isolation. Have you ever felt yourself fading in silence, believing no one sees your struggle beneath your smile? There is a war, and you are exhausted not because you lack courage, but because you have carried too much for too long. Scripture teaches us that God does not abandon his servants, yet he often sends help not from heaven, but from beside you. Aaron and Hur are not always obvious. They may come in the form of a friend who texts at the right moment, a sermon you stumble upon when you almost gave up, a voice in a prayer you did not plan to hear. In those interruptions, God is lifting your arms again. So I ask you today, do you recognize when he is trying to hold you up, or are you still determined to stand alone? Allow me to speak plainly this morning. I want to know that you are here, that you are listening, that you are not a silent soldier fading in the back of the valley. If you hear this and your arms tired, type, "I am here," in the comments, or simply write the number 1. Let that small act be your way of letting Aaron and Hur into your battle so your strength does not leak quietly into defeat. I read every response and I pray over them because there is power when we refuse to stand isolated. Moses did not lose because he was weak. He was rescued because he allowed his weakness to be seen and supported. Today, your victory might begin with a simple confession written below. So I will ask you, will you let me know you are still lifting your hands? And if you feel like you cannot even lift them anymore, remember the lesson God wrote into Israel's story, that when one grows tired, another can help carry the weight. When one falters, the battle is not lost, because community becomes the very extension of grace. Perhaps you have believed the lie that your struggle disqualifies you, that strong Christians never get weary. But Moses was chosen, and still he trembled. David was anointed, and still he wept. Elijah called down fire, and still collapsed beneath despair. The measure of your faith is not found in how long you can stand alone, but in how willing you are to let others lift you when your knees shake and your heart grows faint. This is why confession matters, not as shame, but as invitation. The moment you say, "I am here," you declare to both heaven and hell that you refuse to fight in silence. You allow the Aaron and Hur of this generation to step beside you, unseen yet powerful friends who by prayer, encouragement, and presence keep you from surrendering to defeat. I know it feels vulnerable to admit you are tired, but vulnerability is not weakness. It is the doorway to strength. Moses' victory did not come from stubborn independence, but from shared endurance. So if your heart is heavy, take this as your stone of rest, and these words as hands lifting yours again. Every time you whisper a prayer when you feel empty, every time you listen to a word that stirs faith, every time you choose to type even a single number as a cry for help, you are stepping back into the stream of grace. And I assure you, God notices, heaven records it, and the valley shifts because of it. You are not forgotten. You are not abandoned. You are not overlooked. Your fatigue is not failure. Your trembling is not the end. It is the very place where the Lord writes his glory through borrowed strength. So once more I ask, will you let yourself be seen? Will you allow support to meet you in your weariness? Will you declare, even quietly, that you are still here, still lifting, still refusing to let the enemy claim the last word, because victory has never belonged to the strongest. It has always belonged to the surrendered, and today that surrender might be as small and as holy as writing one simple line: I am here. Worship has never been the easy path. It is the narrow road that asks a trembling soul to keep singing even when the valley grows darker. This is why morning prayer is not a ritual, it is survival. For while the world wakes up chasing deadlines and distractions, the believer is called first to lift their heart before the one who already sees every unseen battle. Moses did not climb the hill because it was convenient, he climbed because he knew that without the presence of God, victory in the valley would be nothing more than temporary relief. I often hear people say they want peace, but peace is not found in avoidance. It is found in surrender. It is discovered in that quiet moment when you choose to lift your hands even as your knees shake. For it is there that heaven begins to fight on your behalf. Life will give you countless reasons to delay worship, a chaotic morning, a distressed mind, a weary body. But it is precisely then that worship becomes the most powerful, because it is no longer a song, point of comfort, but a declaration of war for your soul. When Moses lifted his staff, he did not deny the danger below. He simply testified that someone greater was above him, guiding the outcome. Could it be that one of the greatest miracles is not storm stopped or enemy scattered, but your heart gently turning back toward God before the noise of the day consumes you? Perhaps the real breakthrough happens not at the end of the prayer, but at the very beginning, when you choose to open your mouth despite the heaviness inside you. When you whisper, Lord, I need you more than I need anything else. Something sacred ignites in that surrender, and unseen hands begin to steady what was falling. This has always been the mystery of worship. It does not change God. It changes us. It lifts our eyes from fear to faith, from striving to resting, and it reminds us that even as the world races on, we dwell under the shadow of the Almighty. And in that shadow, no weapon formed against us shall prosper. So let your heart rise again this morning. Let your hands find their place of surrender, and watch as the one who never sleeps begins to move on your behalf. And let me remind you that consistency is itself an act of faith, for when you choose to return to prayer again and again, even when you do not feel the fire, you are building an altar that cannot be torn down by circumstance. Each whispered prayer becomes a stone laid upon another, until one day you look back and realize you are standing on a mountain that was built by surrender alone. Worship is not measured by volume or eloquence, but by persistence, by the simple choice to show up before the throne when everything else calls for your attention. The enemy trembles, not when you feel strong, but when you kneel weak, yet refuse to quit. Every lifted hand is a proclamation that the valley will not own you, that despair will not silence you, that fatigue will not define you. So worship in the morning, not because the day is easy, but because it is difficult worship. When the sun rises, not to impress heaven, but to align with it. Because in that alignment, you discover a strength that outlasts deadlines, distractions, and even defeats. Perhaps you fear that your small prayer barely reaches beyond the ceiling. But remember, the God who parted seas and stopped the sun also bends low to hear the faintest whisper of his child. Nothing is wasted when given in faith, and no moment of worship goes unnoticed by the one who counts every tear and records every sigh. So take courage. The unseen hand that steadied Moses still steadies you. The God who fought for Israel still fights for you. And the Spirit who hovered over creation now hovers over your life, filling the ordinary with eternal weight this morning. Let and your prayer be more than routine. Let it be the cry that anchors your day in the presence of the eternal King. And as you rise from that place, know that heaven is already ahead of you, making crooked paths straight and lifting burdens you did not even know you. Carried worship may not erase the valley, but it guarantees you are never walking it alone. So today, lift your heart, open your mouth, whisper the name above every name, and watch how the God who sees in secret rewards you in ways beyond measure for. In the end, worship is not what we give to God. It is what keeps us alive in Him, and without it, we are only drifting. But with it, we are more than conquerors through Him who loves us. You say you trust God, but why then do your hands tremble each time the storm grows near? Perhaps the real test of faith is not in the victories we celebrate, but in the silence between miracles when nothing seems to change, and yet you are asked to keep believing. Moses learned this when his arms ached and his eyes watched the enemy advance with every falter of his worship. The battle below shifted, and so he faced the same question: are you willing to keep lifting your hands? Even when everything in you wants to let go, morning prayer calls us into this holy tension, for it is not a gentle escape, it is a battleground of the soul where surrender must be chosen again and again, long after the emotion has faded. That is why God allowed Aaron and Hur to stand beside Moses, because he knew that no human heart can hold the weight of destiny on its own, and neither can you. Perhaps you have assumed that your weakness disqualifies you from spiritual victory. Yet in this story, weakness was not the enemy. Pride was. Heaven did not move because Moses was strong. Heaven moved because Moses was surrendered. And when his strength failed, his willingness did not. This is where you must ask yourself, do I value the presence of God enough to stay in worship, even when there is no sign of breakthrough? Am I willing to sit on the stone if that is what keeps my hands lifted? Am I willing to let others see that I grow tired too? The enemy hopes you will be embarrassed by your exhaustion, that you will step back from prayer, that you will drop your arms so quietly no one hears you fall. But the Spirit of God is whispering, stand your ground, lift your hands again, not because you feel mighty, but because He is mighty, not because you understand, but because He is worthy. The true victory of the believer is not a life without battles. It is a life where battles are fought from the hilltop of surrender, not the valley of fear. So when morning prayer begins anew tomorrow and the day presses in, I challenge you to remember this: you were never meant to fight by strength alone. You were meant to worship with hands lifted high, because when your eyes are fixed on the throne and your posture remains surrendered, you step into territory where earth cannot explain what heaven is doing. And it is in that territory that defeat turns into destiny. Are you ready to discover what happens next when surrender becomes your greatest weapon? The valley will still roar, the storms will still rise, but the heart that has learned to yield becomes unshakable, because it knows where its anchor is placed in worship. You are not proving to God how strong you are. You are reminding your soul who truly holds the power. You are choosing to align your frailty with His unbreakable will, and in that alignment lies the secret to enduring every season. When Moses lifted his staff, he was not commanding heaven. He was confessing dependence. It is that same confession that transforms your weakest whisper into a weapon sharper than any blade. Your arms may shake your lips, may falter, your knees may bend low, but heaven responds not to perfection, but to surrender. Every time you pray in the morning, you step back onto that hilltop, you declare again that your hope is not in circumstances, but in the one who reigns above them all. And if you feel alone in that fight, know this: God still sends Aaron and Hur into your life. They may appear as a friend who reminds you to keep going, a word you stumble across when you are weary, or even this very message right now whispering, do not quit, keep lifting, keep believing, because you are not as forgotten as you feel. If your arms are heavy, let someone know. If your spirit is faint, confess it aloud, for hiding your weakness only feeds the enemy, but revealing it allows God to send help. Your victory is not stolen by fatigue. It is surrendered only when you choose silence over prayer. So rise again tomorrow. Open your mouth and whisper the name above every name. Let that whisper grow into a song. Let that song rise into surrender, and let that surrender become the atmosphere where miracles take root. The storms may not cease instantly, but within you the storm will bow, for the God who steadies hands on the hill is the same God who holds you now and forever.